And I want to make sure that we've got enough time for our second panel, which is moderated by Alan Burson. Alan Burson is well and favorably known to a number of people here in the room today. We know him as a current Wilson Center Global Fellow, but he's also chairman of his own company, BorderWorks LLC, and he's had an incredible number of distinguished positions in the U.S. government and in state government as well. He was Department of Homeland Security's Assistant Secretary for International Affairs, i.e. their chief diplomat in that department. He was Vice President of Interpol for the Americas region and Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, overseeing CBP's 58,000 person workforce. Sir, I'm just going to turn the floor over to you for panel two.
Thank you, Lynn, and good morning, everyone. This is a great opportunity. I was saying to the panelists when I was in government, I would follow the practice of coming in, welcoming people, providing some overview, and then departing. And I think that's a problem. I want to commend the officers from CBP who typically do stay and listen to what researchers, operators, academics, and non-NGO representatives have to say, because at the end of the day, the glass is always half empty and half full, both. And what we have to recognize is, looking back, we should not deny that we need to, that we've made great progress in terms of dealing with the four variables that affect this notion that border lines also have to accommodate border flows, that in fact it's a combination of securing commerce, securing the passage of people in the international travel zone and the global supply chain, but also recognizing that economic competitiveness requires that there be a thickening and thinning at the same time. And I think one of the great accomplishments that many of the people in this audience have contributed to is that in 9/11, when we saw the lines back into Canada for 10 or 12 miles north and wait times measured by fractions of days rather than minutes or hours even, we were looking at every piece of straw, at every passenger and every vehicle in ways that we wouldn't dare to do today. And it is a tribute to the people who have put together the situation of thickening and thinning to make them not mutually exclusive and in conflict, but actually working together. And what we have in looking at these problems are four variables, colored by a fifth, which is that we have infrastructure, we have staffing, we have processing strategies, and we have technology. And what we'd like to focus on in this panel, and it's a terrific panel that brings together operators and academicians, research scientists, is to look at how we have technology. What role does technology play in making a border that needs to be secure but also fluid, one that can accommodate the lines of sovereignty but also the flows of commerce and people? How does technology contribute to that? And you have in your packets the biographies of we have 5 distinguished panelists. We have Colleen Manaher from CBP, the Executive Director of Planning, and has been, I'm pleased to say, as a former colleague of Colleen's, probably one of a handful of people who are responsible for the progress we've seen over the last 15 years in bringing technology to bear on CBP operations. Craig Richmond, who I think Craig will be happy to hear me correct one of the few mistakes that you'll hear Mr. Litvak make in his presentation. Actually, YVR has received the designation of the best airport in North America for a 9th consecutive year.
Thank you.
Not merely 8. Catherine Friedman, a research scientist, policy analyst from the Golden Horseshoe region, is here to discuss her findings and observations regarding the Peace Bridge. Bill Anderson, the executive director of the Cross-Border Institute at the University of Windsor, again, who's done a lot of applied research for the benefit of those of us who have operated borders. Welcome, Bill. Steve McHugh, who is now the Senior Vice President of Rapiscan and as an expert in terms of the scanning technologies that we bring to bear on cross-border cargo and people. So it's a terrific panel. Let's start with Craig Richmond, the CEO of the Vancouver Airport Authority, and who's contributed so much in YVR. We are going to try to stay within our 10 minutes so that we have a benefit of a 20 minutes or 25 minutes of discussion, including questions and answers with the audience. And my panel members are prepared for me to start fidgeting as they move well over the 10 minutes. So please, Craig.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up because I do have pictures, and my staff actually prefers if I stay within the lines. So also there's going to be some nice pictures of Vancouver. So I wanted to say, so nice to see Lynn. Lynn, you epitomize to me the best qualities of America's State Department. So thank you so much for your work in Vancouver. So nice to see you. To our CBSA and CBP colleagues, big shout out. You know, I've worked with you folks for a quarter century, and you're always fantastic. Funny story. My whole life is about funny stories. Coming in on Saturday night, arriving in from Reykjavik, and a very nice gentleman at the CBP said to me, "So where are you coming from?" I said, "Reykjavik," and I had a big smile on my face. He says, "Where are you here?" I said, "Conference." He goes, What are you here? What kind of conference?" I said, "Innovation in U.S. Canada border." And he waits about 3 beats and he goes, "Pass, friend." Very clever guy. And Jennifer may be 28, but I think I may be the only panelist who actually looks like Woodrow Wilson. So. Anyway, there's a good mix of experts on the panel today, covering everything from biometrics to AI and innovative cargo screening. Just goes to show how diverse and complex the border process is. Well, I need that little gizmo.
Oh, here, sir.
Thank you. We all approach border management with different viewpoints. We're all connected through various processes in some ways. So what I want to talk about is how the current experience and how we can enhance it to improve the mobility of people and goods through Canada-U.S. borders, air, land, and sea, all while ensuring that safety and security are not compromised, but actually improved. I'll give you a few thoughts on this, but first just a couple of things about Vancouver. Vancouver International Airport, or YVR as it's fondly referred to, is strategically positioned as Canada's Asia Pacific gateway. This provides us with an ideal opportunity to connect key markets such as Asia and the Americas. In fact, we are right in the middle of the quickest route between these two key markets. But it's not just geography. We also have a unique governance model. YVR is managed by the Vancouver Airport Authority. It's a not-for-profit private company. So not nonprofit and not for-profit, not-for-profit, with no shareholders. So every dollar we make gets refocused back into the airport. We constantly innovate. In fact, innovation is one of our core principles, and people have asked me, why do you do things like the border conferences and all that? And it never occurred to me not to. We've always tried to keep innovation as one of our drivers. We're also experiencing incredible growth, double digits from key markets such as Mexico, the U.S., and Asia. And it, of course, is a great challenge and a great opportunity. So as we continue to grow, we need technology to help improve the passenger journey, shift pressure off our customs staff. We've actually been doing this for some time. Over a decade ago, we identified the need to address long lineups in immigration in Canada. So instead of building a larger footprint for the building, we worked closely with CBSA on a different solution. And this led to the creation of our Border Express kiosks, locally made self-serve kiosks that remove the administrative function performed by border agents while greatly reducing passenger wait times, about 4 times. We rolled out the first self-service kiosk back in 2008. It was so successful that we sold them to other Canadian airports. And then we built a version for U.S. CBP and rolled it out in 2013. And the result was again, reduced queues, freeing up terminal space, but also great sales within the U.S. I'm sure many of you who have used our APC kiosk when arriving on an international flight at many U.S. airports or at pre-clearance at Canadian airports. And last year, we launched the primary inspection kiosks in partnership with CBSA. And these kiosks process nearly 100% of all international travelers and have greatly reduced wait times. And we've worked with CBSA and CBP on these products to improve the airport experience. We've also got a product we sell. We've now sold over 1,400 of these kiosks to 40 airports in North America, the Caribbean, and Europe. And in Cyprus, they're now using it for exit immigration, and we think that's another huge possibility. We also have sold them out of airports into seaports, and there's actually one on a ferry in the Caribbean. So it's actually turned into a great revenue stream for us as well. It's a great example of a technological solution assisting with both the passenger experience and the mobility of people across a border when staffing resources are constrained. Our vision is to be a world-class hub airport. And what this means, we aim to facilitate the movement of people and products all over the globe. We already do it, but as we grow, we want to lead the way and demonstrate how a connecting hub should function. So to get where we want to be, we first need to understand that for the passenger, the air travel journey is just part of the process. You know, nobody except me goes to the airport to stay there. It's just nothing but a portal, right? And you can see all the various ways that people come through and buy the airport. Passenger drives and parks their car at the airport, checks in, drops off baggage, goes through security screening, gets pre-cleared at U.S. CBP, and heads to their gate for a flight to Los Angeles. Passenger arrives from U.S. destination, clears Canada Customs at the airport, and heads to the seaport to take a cruise ship to Alaska. Passenger flies from New York to YVR, takes the Rocky Mountaineer on a coastal passage tour, returns to Vancouver, goes through pre-clearance at the train station, continues on by train to Seattle, and then flies back to New York from SeaTac. And so on and so on. Passenger arrives on a connecting flight from Melbourne to Newark. And so in all scenarios, the airport is not the end or the start, merely a point along the way. Much like an old railway switch yard. Sorry, not old railways, but as in the old days, a railway switch. No, that doesn't work either. But it means minimal wait times, minimal complexity, enjoyable experience is what you need. But it's not getting easier. You know, we've been growing by almost 10% a year. So last year, 24 million passengers. And our goal is to get to 29 million by 2020. So we're focusing a lot of our efforts on the speed and ease of the hub. We'll not be able to keep up with this level of growth without further improving it. And here's an example. This is a linear picture of how many steps there are to arrive by car and get out by airplane. And I could go through those, but in the interest of time, there's a lot. There's at least 9 times that the passenger is touched, and at least 3 times they have documents. And, yes, it's frustrating to go through security. It's frustrating to go through pre-clearance. And each one of them is very important, but the whole point is it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and there's a lot of duplication. And I always find it kind of funny, that you've known I was going to fly for 3 months. I bought my ticket 3 months ago. You know who I am, and yet it always seems to be a surprise to everybody when I show up. And I think that's why I'm really keen on the idea of global ID. So I want to talk about, go at what, if we could remove these stresses, what it might look like. So I think facial ID, we're already seeing trials. I think it's going to be amazing. Here's a tourist who has arrived, drops off the rental car just by parking it. We know who he is. We know that he's rented the car. No paperwork is to fill out, no lineups. As soon as he approaches the terminal, we capture his biometrics. Oh yeah, that's Mr. Smith who's flying to Munich. Doesn't need to check in because that happened automatically when he was driving up, and he just drops his bag in a box on the floor and it goes away. And there's no wait time. He walks right through screening, and honestly, with the technology we have today, we could put people through a walkway where they could get a coffee, go down to the gate, and not realize they've been screened. And yes, there's something about security as theater, and I'm not minimizing that, but we could make it a lot more seamless. We know who you are. You fly all the time through our airport. We know that you're not an issue. Yes, we can pull you aside. I gave this talk at Google, and somebody in the audience said, but what if, they make a break for it? I said, you ever been to Vegas in a casino? We can make it so you cannot run away, and we can easily, surreptitiously pull you aside. Connecting passengers should be even easier. I mean, you've been on an airplane for 12 hours. We know who you are. we should be able to connect you and say, yes, just pass, friend, and put you right through to your next gate, everybody having a good look at you. One of the things when I first came back to Vancouver and we were starting to sell the kiosks, I was a little bit worried about how the agents would take them. Are they seeing them as a threat to their job? And actually, both CBSA and CBP agents in Vancouver love them generally because it gives them more time to be law enforcement officers. I'd much rather that CBP agents and CBSA agents were looking at people walking through and just looking and pulling people aside if there's something a little bit odd, than actually spending a lot of time on some process and worrying about whether there's another bottle of wine in your luggage. The end result, my dream, is no steps. Now, I know it's going to be hard to get there, but I don't think we should replace all the steps we have today with some new technology. If there's 9 steps now and all we do is add facial recognition to every step, that's not improving it. You know, cut the steps down. I would like to see none, but let's say 2 when you arrive and go through security down at the gate. I think that's not impossible. It's a very exciting time to work in our respective sectors to deliver great customer experience and strengthen security. None of us can keep up with the human resources required to keep our borders running safely, securely, and efficiently. So let's move away from a fear-based approach where everyone has to be screened and to one that allows trusted and known travelers to move through in a seamless process and focus our resources on a more thorough vetting of higher risk passengers or unknown passengers. It will lead to much more effective security and a more pleasant travel experience for the majority of legitimate travelers. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Next, we call on Colleen Manaher to present on facial recognition to connect biographic and biometric information. Please.
Thank you. I'm just going to grab the clicker,
Oh, sorry.
if I may. I might as well. Since you did it, I'm going to do it. All right. So before I begin, I just want to extend a big thank you to Mr. Burson for hosting the panel, and big shout out to Lynn and the Wilson Center. I always love, and I see so many familiar faces. So hopefully today you will be really excited when I finish this and not only understand my enthusiasm, but also share my passion for what I'm about to tell you. Now, most of you, by the time I'm done, will think that I put Mr. Richmond up to that, but I did not. Actually, it just, thank you, proves the point when I do discuss the power of partnerships. So let's begin.
Move over here.
So I actually love that we're ready, are you? And that's the government actually saying that to the stakeholders. Isn't that amazing? I'm ready, are you? So I just adore that video. So I want you to imagine, very similar to what Mr. Richmond pointed out, I want you to imagine going from reservation to destination and back home again without a passport, without a boarding card, without an RFID document, where security is assured, transparent, and behind the scenes. If I could take you through the process, it was very similar to Craig's, right? Mine just might have a little bit of a twist because it involves a lot of the different stakeholders. But you'll see that we are right in sync here. You'll be home in your fuzzy slippers waiting, you got to catch a flight to London, you log in, and right there maybe your face is captured to start the process. You arrive at the airport. You have your bag, you go to check it in, it's all automatic. By the way, you haven't seen a person yet. As you're walking through the airport, maybe you want to go into the duty free. Maybe you want to go into the lounge. and you go. Your face simply allows you to enter that. Let's say you go through TSA. Well, they're waiting for you, right? So no more of this guy, right, looking at your boarding card and your passport. Why? Because he already has that manifest. I want you to think about it. In an airport, and every single day between us and TSA, we know exactly who's in that airport. So let's capitalize on that, right? So through TSA, by the way, you haven't shown a passport yet. You haven't shown your boarding card or an RFID document. You're on your way to the gate. You board seamlessly. You fly to London. You're coming back home. And while you're waiting, as we all do, to deplane, while we're on that runway, you look at your iPhone. And what does it say? It says, "Hi, Colleen. Welcome home. Hope you had a good trip to London. We're expecting you at global entry where there's no wait." So it's a wayfinding that I take you through. You leave on your baggage, and that's it. So that seamless journey is ours to plan with the power of partnership for the future. But this solution, while I sit here and say, you know, we're open for business, our back-end facial matching is complete, you know, I almost sound as though this just came overnight. You know, the solution was elusive to the government for quite some time, well over 12 years. And it really wasn't until it came to CBP, where, if I may, I think the government was all caught up in the how and the what, and not necessarily in the why. And once we figured out the why we're doing this, when we realized this transformation value, all of a sudden, bits and pieces came into place. But it wasn't until a trip to Under Armour, this massive consumer enterprise, right, where we walk in and we look at this enterprise, and one of the questions we asked was, how do you manage all this data? How do you possibly manage all this data? I mean, think about it. From our perspective, we're managing 1 million people's data a day, right? And we insist on going 1 to a gazillion million to try to find that identity. And Under Armour looked at us very plainly and said, you just need just-in-time data. You just need the data you need right now. Boom, it's like a light bulb going off, right? So if we look at our modes of travel, we realized, oh my God, I got an airport, I got an airplane with a manifest. I'm gonna go 1 to maybe 300, 1 to 400. Let's think about cruise, 1 to 2,000, right? I don't need to go to 1 to a gazillion million. I already know who those are. And land border, we know really that about approximately 97, 95% are commuters in that land border environment over a certain period of time. So for pedestrian, maybe it's 1 to 20,000, and for cars, maybe it's 1 to 50,000. But it's within reach, right? So we put a camera on a stick, and I'm not kidding, it was just a quick, innovative idea, and out in Atlanta we went. You wanna know what we found when we looked at that manifest? That we could match that in our holdings already of photos that people had already given us. We already had that in our holdings. Something like 97%. Woo, home run, right? Let's see if we can match that. And we matched it at 97%. We are now at eight airports in operation. We are working with our partners on the airlines and the airports across the nation. And I'm going to tell you soon, it's my hope that we will have an airport that will be fully biometric on the entry and exit side, and that we can work on that internal side to make it hopefully one of the first seamless airports in the nation. So I'm just going to back this up a second. I'm sorry, to make sure you can hear it. So a lot of you might think, well, this is new technology. The travelers are afraid. I'm not too sure. So I don't want you to hear it from me. Let's actually hear from some travelers that took the British Air flight. I'm sorry, I need some sound.
Come in through the customs.
I don't
May I
mind.
back
I
it
don't know
up?
if it's for security.
I'm sorry, guys, I'm going to back this up on you, so I want you to.
And that is a fantastic invention to be able to do that, to be able to come into America and to go straight through with the eye and facial to come in through the customs.
I don't mind. I don't know if it's for security. It's fine. If it's for anything else, I really don't care as long as it speeds it up.
You can't lose your face. Your face is with you regardless wherever you go. I would imagine at any one day, several people will lose their boarding passes.
So you heard from the exact travelers themselves, and it wasn't scripted. That was from their own, and they're using that in Los Angeles right now on the British Air flight. Pretty amazing. And just to give you a teaser here, We deployed, we thought that same concept, can you imagine it on entry? So think of this on an entry situation, right? Where no more passports, a family of 5, think about it, they're coming up with all these 5 passports, right? And they're trying to get the kids in there together, right? And then they all have their boarding cards and all of that. And if they're from the UK, right, the additional requirement of the slaps, right, the slap prints. So if you use a multimodal, all of that is done in the background. So as a teaser, we wanted folks to really see what the end-to-end travel experience could be. We deployed this to Atlanta on a Korean Air flight that usually takes us an hour. We cleared it, you ready for this, in 20 minutes. So the future is here, and we are really excited about it. But it isn't just for airports, right? That will be our first transformative travel experience that will completely change. But let's take cruise. For those of you who recently cruised, what happens when you walk on that cruise ship, right? You get your SeaPass card. What do you do with your SeaPass card? You get your photo, right? So clearly we are certainly going to leverage that, and the cruise environment will be subject to the same type of improvements of effectiveness and efficiency that you see in the air environment. And land, probably our last frontier for facial recognition, I am telling you, is super excited. I'm just going to give you a couple teasers right now. For cargo, right? And I don't know if Peacebridge is here, but I just want to do a shout out for the Peacebridge, another great partner similar to Vancouver and everyone. So how about we start taking that truck driver's photo way over in Canada so we know, and that starts the process there. So no more of the documents on the U.S. side. Let's see what kind of efficiency we can have there. Body-worn cameras, pretty amazing. Similar to the vest you might have seen me wore when I walked in, there are body-worn cameras that are capable of facial recognition. So let's just take it. Yeah, I'm going out maybe 3 to 5 years, but I don't care because I have to dream, right? That's what actually, how lucky am I? I get paid to do that, right? So 3 to 5 years, body-worn camera vest, right? Does facial recognition. So can you imagine the officer out doing his primary inspection with facial recognition? Maybe he has one of these things in a watchtower list and he's saying, third vehicle to the left, everyone else is good, right? Or maybe he has his watch on, right? And says, okay, I got it, third vehicle, got it. He's his own primary booth. That would be the same. And for pedestrian, you will see similar results as you do to the air environment. Lastly, the power of partnerships, right? There is no me in border security. There's only a we, right? Because together, if I do something alone, it's considered a government imposition, right? And the last thing any travel experience or travel initiatives needs is me to come in and impose something, right? It will just exacerbate sometimes an already horrible situation, right? But how about together? Together with all the stakeholders, we could transform the entire air experience from reservation to destination and back home again. And again, that's the we in border security. There's no longer a me here. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. I think Colleen is good evidence that the government can think out of the box if you have the right leaders in place. Next, we want to welcome Dr. Catherine Friedman, a research associate professor of law and planning at the University of Buffalo and a global fellow here at the Wilson Center, to present on innovation outside the Beltway, cross-border Buffalo-Niagara region, the Golden Horseshoe.
I just want to make sure this is set up properly. Okay. Actually, here, do you want me to? Yep. Here.
That was from one of Dr. Friedman's students.
think we're actually colluding.
I think we're in cahoots.
Exactly.
It looks nice with it.
No, that's okay. It's altogether fitting and proper on a technology
Yeah,
panel
exactly.
that we have the inevitable technology problem.
Well, I can start, and if it comes up, that'll be fabulous. So again, thank you very much for the invitation to present here this morning. Hang on. Try to log in.
Everybody close your eyes.
Okay, now, hopefully it'll work with the clicker. If not, if I just tell you to click, you can click, okay? Okay, so again, good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, Lynn and Laura, for presenting, for asking me to present to you today. Yeah, my name's Catherine Friedman. I'm from the University of Buffalo. As the former assistant secretary mentioned, I hail from the binational Buffalo-Niagara region, which not only encompasses 8 counties of western New York, but all the way up through the greater Golden Horseshoe into Toronto and beyond. It is the largest cross-border region across the northern border, primarily because of Toronto, and I'm talking about largest in terms of population and population density. We like to view ourselves as particularly innovative for a whole host of different reasons, and one of the areas in which stakeholders are innovative is in the area of border security. And I am going to talk to you today about a program that was implemented at the Peace Bridge. And I also have to give a shout out to Ron Reines, who is the general manager of the Peace Bridge, as well as Mark McVitie, who works at CBP down in that neck of the woods. I gathered a lot of the information for this presentation from them. And they were absolutely terrific in terms of allowing me, their time and their expertise to pull this together. So I'm going to talk about, let's see if it works. Come on. Okay. You want to click next. You have to click next. There we go. There we go. PAIR. Okay. It is the acronym and stands for the Pre-Arrival Readiness Evaluation Program. Okay, click please. Yeah, it is your program. Both of these individuals had a tremendous role to play in getting this program off the ground, which is something that I'm going to get to in a little bit. So essentially, very, very briefly, even though not mandated by law, all commercial vehicles must have an e-manifest on file and all user fees paid prior to CBP inspection at the Peace Bridge. In addition, this is an innovative way that is taking existing law, which doesn't mandate e-manifests or user fees, and stakeholders at the Peace Bridge said, we need these pieces in place. And we also need these pieces in place, and we're going to operate them in Canadian territory. And this initiative is going to be staffed and supported by the Peace Bridge Authority. Now, you may be asking, well, why? Why would stakeholders on the ground need to do this? Want to click? Okay, and click one more time. Okay, so there's a very, very important history that is associated with the PAIR program. And I'm not going to go through each of these separate initiatives, but I think that what is important to pull away is that the PAIR program and its successes, which I'll discuss in a second, are a direct result of the prior iterations that Canada and the United States have undertaken when it comes to shared border management. And in particular, there was a 2014 pre-inspection pilot undertaken under the auspices of the Beyond the Border program. Again, these two individuals sitting here had a lot to do with that. That was actually instrumental in getting PAIR on the ground in our region in late 2016, early 2017. Would you click, please? Okay, so in addition to this history, there's a number of other variables or factors that are important for understanding why this PAIR program was implemented. Buffalo Niagara, the Peace Bridge in particular, is located in a part of Buffalo. It has an extremely small U.S. plaza. In fact, I think it's only approximately 14 acres in size. So the U.S. Plaza and folks on our side of the border are quite constrained when it comes to border facilitation, border processing, border security issues. In addition to the size of the U.S. Plaza, and you can see the U.S. Plaza down there in front, the Peace Bridge and the Plaza are located in a highly, highly dense urban neighborhood. That's the lower west side of Buffalo. And so there is great recognition of facilitating commercial vehicles at this border point because idling trucks, tend to give off exhaust, and residents in these neighborhoods are concerned about the health effects caused by a backlog of trucks on the U.S. side of the border. So that's another constraining factor, another factor that the general manager of the Peace Bridge and other stakeholders have to take into account when thinking about border security and border facilitation. Great. But probably the biggest, the largest impetus behind implementing the PAIR program was the plan by the Peace Bridge to redeck the bridge in early 2017. So back in 2016, CBP and the Peace Bridge and a number of other stakeholders got together when the Peace Bridge set forth their intention to redeck the bridge and said, what are we going to do about this? Because the Peace Bridge actually only has 3 lanes. It's a very, very small bridge when it comes to lanes. And by taking 1 lane out for redecking, essentially you only had 2 lanes, 1 lane going into Canada, 1 lane coming out into the United States in order to accommodate all of the traffic. And I should mention, depending on who you listen to or what statistics you read, this particular bridge, 3rd largest border crossing along the northern border. Some people rank it 2nd. Others have said, it's 4th. But I like to say it's, probably the 2nd or the 3rd largest border crossing in terms of commercial flows across the northern border. So when you think about taking 3 lanes and then condensing that to 2, 1 in, 1 out, with cars and trucks in those single lanes, it could have posed tremendous problems. Okay. So, as I said, stakeholders got together and decided to come up with a plan. And the plan, as I mentioned, was to make it mandatory to have all commercial vehicles have an e-manifest on file and have all user fees paid. And rather than talk you through the mechanics of the actual program, I thought I would just show you a little video clip that CBP has allowed me to use at the presentation today. And you'll get a real good sense as to how it works.
My name is Rick Rice. I'm the Acting Supervisory Border Security Officer in the Buffalo Field Office. A brief description of how the PAIR concept works. The Peace Bridge Authority staffs a booth on the Canadian side of the Peace Bridge. The booth is equipped with a commercial license plate reader and is adjacent to a large staging area. The plate of every truck attempting to access the Peace Bridge will trigger a query against CBP data systems. The query will return to the Peace Bridge Authority either a red light or a green light based on the ACE user fee paid and ACE e-manifest on file status indicators. If a green light is received, the driver will be allowed immediate access to cross the Peace Bridge. If a red light is received, the PBA employee will direct the driver to the staging area. Once in the staging area, they will have access to an automated kiosk where they can pay the user fee. They can also use a mobile smart device. If the ACE e-manifest is not on file, the driver will be directed to return to Canada and file their e-manifest prior to returning to the Peace Bridge. PAIR allows the Peace Bridge Authority to effectively meter the flow of traffic onto the Peace Bridge and prioritize access to the bridge for prepared commercial drivers. Future iterations of PAIR may include status indicators for the driver's fast status and the CTPAT status of both the carrier and the importer. This will allow expedited processing and front-of-the-line privileges for CBP trusted traders.
Okay, great. So a couple of key points to pull out of that video. If you notice, the technology and the staffing and the actual booths are owned by the Peace Bridge Authority. Okay, so it's the employees of the Peace Bridge, staff of the Peace Bridge, who are bringing the trucks in, receiving the information, and then they're pinging that information to the CBP database to get a sense as to whether the e-manifests are on file and the user fees paid, and whether or not there are any issues dealing with that particular vehicle. So CBP officers are not located on Canadian soil, right? These are Peace Bridge employees, which sort of gets around some of the issues that folks in our neck of the woods have encountered when it comes to pre-clearance and actually locating CBP officers on Canadian territory. Secondly, it involves a tremendous amount of collaboration. And we've heard that word a lot this morning on this panel and on the first panel, but not necessarily collaboration between Canada and the United States, collaboration among different stakeholders in the region, but as was mentioned on one of the by one of the panelists this morning, collaboration between different levels within Customs and Border Protection. So it was the port CBP personnel and officers working with the field office and working with folks down here in Washington in conjunction with the Peace Bridge Authority management and board of directors in order to make this work. So it really is a tremendous example of collaboration and innovative thinking out there on the border. So how has it improved process? Click please, yep. So from January 2017 to May 2017, ACE manifest filings increased by over 8,000 trucks, 328%. That translated into a time savings of 73.9 seconds per crossing. And with regard to the user fee processing times, they decreased by 83%, and this was translated into an average savings of 1.4 work hours per day. So again, by moving some of the administrative processing aspects of trade facilitation over to the Canadian side and using Peace Bridge employees, personnel, and technology, able to achieve quite a bit when it comes to flows and facilitation. So then simply in terms of what's next, several weeks ago it was announced that this pilot project is going to be expanded to include facial recognition, having facial recognition cameras in Fort Erie, and also X-ray machines and radiation machines or technology over in Fort Erie as well. There is some thought, some questions as to whether this program could be applied in other places along the northern border, perhaps not having to locate personnel on the Canadian side of the border due because of, the U.S. plaza size restraints and because of, the neighborhood density and the proximity to the neighborhood, as is in the case of Buffalo, Niagara. But other border crossings, personnel and stakeholders in other regions or ports across the northern border may find some of the insights and some of the lessons from this program to be applicable in their region, and they can, take those insights and work them into their particular context. Because as Dr. Troutman mentioned this morning, Lori Troutman, I share the view that you can't approach border security between Canada and the United States in a monolithic manner. I think each border crossing is different. I think there are different regional approaches, and that has to be taken into account when thinking about trade, facilitation, innovation in the context of the Canada-U.S. border in the 21st century. I think that's it. You want to click once more? Yep, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Next, Dr. Bill Anderson, Director of Cross-Border Institute at the University of Windsor, will present on artificial intelligence and tracking technology for cross-border supply chains. Bill.
Thank you. That sounds like a very techie talk, and I'm going to talk at a sort of conceptual level. I also want, if we can, do I have a clicker?
Oh, I think I have it.
Thank you. And I want to start just with a few key messages for context. Remember, I'm a professor. That means I'm a guy that gets paid to film 90-minute time slots. And I know Steve won't appreciate it if I do that again, so I'm going to try to be really fast. I just want to make a few points that relate to what we're about. At the Cross-Border Institute, we do research on the movement of goods and people across the Canada-U.S. border and other land borders. We have a very strong focus on cross-border supply chains, and we like to talk about something called the binational advantage, and I'll spare you a sermon on that today, but that is the case that, especially in the Great Lakes region, Canada and the United States economies are much more efficient and much more productive if they're integrated. When you talk about cross-border supply chains, the focus needs to be on reliability. If you talk to people in the industry, you hear this over and over again. They're not so much worried about what the average time it takes to get across the border is with their trucks. They're worried about the fact that it's not consistent from day to day. And the problems that come about is when there's a significant delay. I won't talk too much about this, but one way I always like to describe this is if we can make land borders a big POE more like an airport. And I don't mean what we heard today about the customer experience, which was fascinating, but more like you've got an airport, you've got all these planes flying around, and they're all going to the same place. They have to go in and out of the same place. Well, it's very similar with the trucks that are driving around, and they all have to go through that big POE. And you have air traffic control by which you have a constant communication between the airplanes and the airport. I think ideally in the future what we'd like to see is a constant communication between all those trucks that are approaching the border, so that it's kind of like having if you had an airport where air traffic control doesn't hear from the planes till they're right above and they want to say, okay, I'm about to land, or maybe an hour in advance, say, I'm coming and now I'm here, I want to land. You want to have this sort of continuous transfer of information. And another thing I really want to emphasize is there is so much that can be done leveraging existing technology. It is not necessary to invent too much new stuff. And one of the things I do at the university is I try to put together teams of researchers to work on particular problems. And I always say you don't have to invent anything. You don't have to start with anything new. Use the stuff that's out there and see how you can make better use of it. So I'm going to give a couple of sort of conceptual examples about that, and I'm going to talk about very quickly about a project that we're doing. Now, let me give an example. I'm just put this up. This is not so much about the topic, but one of the examples of those existing technologies, very well-established technologies, is GPS. The fact that we've got GPS in most of the trucks across the border these days. We've been working with GPS data for a while to do research on truck movements and spatial patterns, and this is a map that we show a lot. This is a map that we took about, we have GPS records which we purchased from Shaw Tracking, which is a big GPS service provider. We have about 60,000 trucks, and we can buy the records from them, which gets up into the billions in terms, because every time the GPS pings, there's a record. But if you know how to analyze that data, That's a picture of about 250 trucks came across the Ambassador Bridge. Where did they come from? So this is what we would call an ex post use of GPS, ex post after the fact. We're using it for research purposes. Now what we're doing is we're working on some simple concepts of how do you use GPS in real time in order to make the flow better. One of the ideas that we have is, we were looking at the rail case. In the rail near Windsor, where we are, there's a tunnel that goes underneath the Detroit River, just as the Ambassador Bridge goes over the Detroit River. The tunnel is for rail. And there's a VACUS scanner. They do 100% scanning. We've got CBP employees actually out there on the track doing the scanning. And then it goes into a secure corridor, and in that secure corridor, nothing can happen to it before it gets into the tunnel. Well, if you think about Trusted Trader, whatever Trusted Trader program, whether it's PIP or CTPAT, the idea is that you have a secure facility, and you can do audits on the secure facility. The insecurity comes about during that period between the time that the truck leaves that secure facility and it gets to the border. If you can create a virtual secure corridor, right? You can't physically create a secure corridor, but you can do it virtually if you have good quality GPS tracking. And essentially, at some point before the truck arrives at the border, if you find a way to package the information that can verify that that truck has not stopped, it has not deviated from its routes, its doors haven't opened, and so there wasn't an opportunity for the introduction of contraband, then you'll be able to give it a lower risk rating when it arrives at the border. There would be some period, because you can't do this instantly. Essentially what you need to do is you need to transfer the information to the risk assessment algorithms. You would need to have careful surveillance, but only very close to the border, and then you would be able to get a truck to the border and be pretty sure that nothing has been introduced onto that truck en route from that secure facility to the POE. If you take that idea and stretch it out a little bit, you can get to what we call continuously updated risk assessments. And this has got, some letters on there that relate to some mathematics, but essentially what we're saying here is you can imagine that there's that same secure facility, and you've got a bunch of suppliers, and so the circles are suppliers. Let's say there's an automotive plant. The circles are suppliers. Each one of those suppliers has some risk associated with it. Each one of the trips from the suppliers to the big secure facility has a risk associated with it. There's a risk at that secure facility, and then there's the risk in that virtual secure corridor. So essentially what we're doing is we're going back along the supply chain and assigning risk to all the steps along the way. And it's nice to talk about this conceptually, but how would you implement it? If you could do it, the point is here, what you see beyond there is that you could then assign those trucks to different inspection ideas. You notice the green lane. The green lane is something that everybody in industry wants to talk about. When are you going to get to the green lane? As if I was in charge, right? They ask me even. Obviously, if you're ever going to do a green lane, the secret is going to be you're going to have very risk assessment that tells you that there's a minuscule risk associated with this particular truck, right? A primary inspection line, a secondary, you could direct something to secondary without going through the PIL if you have that continuously updated risk assessment. The technology to do it is there. It's not easy to implement these types of things. We heard a little bit today about distributed ledger technology or blockchain technology. That could be very, very useful in this context. And I won't try to go into it. But basically the idea is to try to go back up the supply chain as far as you can, use information on risks, and then you can come to an overall risk assessment, and that would be updated on the fly. And so if in that last little, does this thing work? Yeah. If in here, someplace, you find the truck pulled into a parking lot, all of a sudden that risk assessment changed, and that goes from being maybe a very low-risk truck to something that's going to get referred to secondary. So you can do that on the fly. That's the idea. That's the concept. And I don't want to indicate this as if it were easy to do, but I think that's the type of thing we should be working towards. One can imagine this whole thing being implemented without any new technology, without any instrumentation on the trucks that is not there already for use in supply chains. The final thing I want to talk about, just as another example, and everybody wants to hear about artificial intelligence, and this is actually new for us, is working in artificial intelligence. This is a project that is really pretty much under development that we would like to be able to commercialize in the next year or two. And it's for crossing time prediction. And I want to emphasize one of the things that I really believe in is when everyone talks about we need to have more reliable crossing times, that's not just the responsibility of CBP or CBSA, it also requires the ability of the carriers to be able to make adjustments on the fly for unexpected things that might happen at the border. So this case here is a study that is using, or not a study, it would be an implementable project, that will essentially tell a truck that's 200 kilometers out from the border to forewarn it if there's going to be a delay, if there's going to be a significant delay. Right now, you can go on and say, what's the state of the border now? But I'm 200 kilometers out, I'm going to be there in about 2 hours. Can you make a prediction of traffic in 2 hours? Believe me, that's not that easy to do. In the whole field of traffic prediction, being able to make predictions even 15 minutes or a half hour out are fairly difficult to do. But the basic idea, and I won't take the time to go through all of this stuff, although I did look up all of those things, so I've forgotten most of them to make sure if anybody asks me what does SVR stand for. But the basic idea is that you extract, it's just getting information from a whole lot of different things. Weather information, that GPS information. Then you've got a program where all the trucks that are in this program are acting as mobile probes, and so you're getting their GPS information in real time. You're getting the line counts from the state and provincial agencies and any, about incidents or whatever. You're combining that out, and you're using a machine learning algorithm. You're basically using a kind of artificial intelligence to be able to identify that combination of things that's happening in all of those data streams that tends to give rise to major delays. And so I will stop there because I know I'm out of time. I will mention that we are doing this with some partners. There's a great program in Ontario that puts government together with business partners. Innovex and Geotab are people that work in advanced technology for supply chains. And IBM Canada has been fantastic. One of the reasons that we can do this is that they provide all of their cloud-based computing resources for us to do this. And we have a postdoctoral fellow who just finished a PhD in artificial intelligence who's taking the lead on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. We conclude with Steve McHugh, and it looks like we may not have enough time for a discussion, but maybe one or two questions from the audience. Please.
Well, first, thank you very much to the Wilson Center and Alan for inviting us here to talk about this today. It's a great opportunity. It certainly is an exciting time to be able to talk about all of those. And to sit on this panel, the conversations thus far have been terrific. And I certainly like the seamless approach, as much international travel as I do to coming back in and out of the country. I need to get up and do it through Vancouver. Do you have anything? Well, I have one, but I can talk it if it's not here. I'm just going to talk it. I came from an Army background. About 9 years ago, I came out of the Army and into Rapiscan, and I have seen such a change over that 9 years with what we've been able to do with technology. And I will assure everyone here, Rapiscan is continuing to invest in opportunities that are out there. The Rapiscan is a division of OSI, and it is the fastest growing division within OSI, and it is bringing a lot of new technologies forward. One of the reasons that we may be, in addition to just the environment that we're in today, One of the things that is created a lot of that growth is we've done a number of acquisitions in the space. About 18 months ago, we acquired AS&E, American Science and Engineering, which is predominantly a backscatter cargo company, and incorporated that. And that was a great fit, or a layer on top of our high energy platforms focused on border security. We have done, through our partners with our partnerships at CBP and CBSA, we've done a lot of innovation with what you can do in that cargo screening environment. We have deployed probably in the neighborhood of 120 systems on the cargo side with CBP. We've got a similar number with on the small non-intrusive inspection side in CBP, and at CBSA we've done equal amounts of growth, but on a smaller scale. But we deployed our first gantry system up in Vancouver just this past year. It's a state-of-the-art facility that's going in up there. So we're happy with a lot of the movement and the traction we're getting along that lines. What we've done with some of those systems, because a lot of them have in the past been some of the X-ray technology that hasn't advanced as much. Just in the last 3 years, I'd say there's been and a lot of it driven by CBP and a lot of our overseas partners, to be able to screen faster, to screen in greater quantities. We have done more in terms of overlapping that, where we just have deployed up into our facility in Boston a multi-energy system, and we're going to be bringing that to the southern border here this next year, but plans to bring it up on the northern border as well. And what that does is it overlays that backscatter technology that provides a clear image of those things on the surface with a high energy inspection image, lays those over each other and integrates those for the operator in a seamless manner, all to accelerate the number of people that you can bring through while increasing the screening that's going on at the border. So we're very excited about that, and it's a new system. There was a great picture of it. You would have loved it. But we also are working very closely with CBP. One of the fastest growing divisions within Rapiscan is our screening solutions business. That has really been spurred by our going out and taking over, doing a lot of turnkey operations. Up to this point, they've been mostly on globally. We've done a lot of those in Mexico, in the Middle East, and in Europe. Those have allowed us to operate a lot of the equipment at a lot of the ports of entry and a lot of the ports. And from that, what we've done is we've learned about what we need to do to develop better training programs, what we need to do to develop better software to be able to maintain uptimes on systems, to be able to do remote diagnostics on equipment that's out there. And all of that is stuff that we're investing in to make sure that we can maintain the solid throughputs, be able to do more at those ports with less needing to be hands-on. And to go along with that, I think another one of the innovative approaches we've taken with a lot of that is in the algorithm development for those systems. We're getting some great data from CBP, from TSA, and from our Canadian partners to bring a lot of those images back into our folks so we know what we're looking at. Like some of the folks have said here this morning, we know a lot about what transits the border every day. When we're doing a lot of these things, we have partnered with TSA and Duke University on our deep learning algorithm development, which is able to go and take a lot of those threats or a lot of those things that we've identified or we've found in the past, put that into the algorithm so it automatically brings that up. It takes it sifts and sorts through a large amounts of data that we've been able to take and manage that data to be able to make that that experience at the border that much easier, that much quicker as we get folks who bring that cargo in, the truckers who bring it in, or the other means that they come in. We have worked a lot with them also on looking at the drivers and how they do that, so we can take that screening record, get the driver's information, how we integrate that in with the cargo X-ray scan, with the manifest data, with data from the radiation detection portals, and put that all in one record. So when it comes to it, you almost get checks in the boxes of the information as it comes through the border. And those are all things that are very exciting for us, because it's just been over the last 3 to 4 years that we've seen a lot of interest in doing that. And I know we talked about public-private partnerships earlier in the day, but those are things that I always heard. When I first came into Rapiscan, I always heard public-private partnerships was thrown out as a buzzword. We want to hear people do more public-private partnerships, but nobody could tell you who, nobody could tell you how, nobody could tell you where, and it was always a public-private partnership so that one guy could point to the next guy to get that done. Now we're seeing some traction. I think that there is an opportunity for that really, and for a lot of folks to be able to work together on that. So with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time so we can get some of those questions, but I really do appreciate everyone's time this morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Just very quickly before we go to the audience, and I'll ask my colleagues on the panel to limit themselves. Let's do this rapid fire, 30 seconds. Colleen, why facial biometrics and not iris or some other of the forms available in terms of exit entry?
Thank you for that. As you know, we had experimented down at Otay Mason, a pedestrian, and what we had found was travelers were resistant to iris. In addition, it seemed clumsy to them. They couldn't get it. It was hard for us to capture, but I have to tell you, with a face, you put a little teddy bear above it, everybody smiles. Thank you, selfies. Thank you, iPhone. It's proved to be a great traveler experience. Thank you.
So does the databases of known identities, of the actual facial photos, are they in a state that would permit the kind of seamless experience that you and Craig are projecting for the future?
Yes, even the photos that the officers take, which you would think would be pretty crummy, are actually pretty good. The technology's come a long way, and the algorithms are really impressive these days. We're matching, like I said, at 97%, because we're going one to few.
Great. So, Craig, as we move from the fear management to the trusted traveler, has it been your experience that we actually have in place a infrastructure for innovation that can even begin to be called efficient? That is to say, from the concept to implementation. How can we improve that? In the defense sector, we see DARPA, the Advanced Research Agency that really has brought some basic research to actual practice. What do we need in the Homeland Security space?
I actually think we're doing very, very well. I think that our relationships with CBP and CBSA show that. I wish I could say with all government agencies it was the same. I would love to see something like a joint center that is funded by industry and government and essentially works on these technologies. And I always like to say, we barely got our inspection kiosks in time this summer. We were just deluge of passengers, up to 4,000 passengers an hour. Without those machines, we would have been really in trouble. And that's just a little too just in time for my liking. We need to be thinking, okay, what's the next 5 years? What are we doing? Always thinking ahead, because air travel is not going, in particular, is not going to go down.
So would you consider, for example, making the Vantage Group, which is the way YVR has marketed its technological and process advances, considering making that a binational outfit?
Well, we actually divested ourselves of Vantage a few years ago, but we still send people back and forth. And so I would see something like that, where we'd actually have a center and we would send some of our people down to help develop. And I would like to say that I think the technology is one thing. We don't want to just put it in the same rooms. That's a mistake to take all this great technology and then keep the same space. You can change the space and make it much more efficient.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Catherine, was your experience with the PAIR program at the Peace Bridge suggest that pilots are a way to go, or should we look at pilots as a problem in that, as someone observed, I've never seen a pilot I didn't like?
I absolutely believe that pilots are the way to go when it comes to border facilitation and border security, along the Canada-U.S. border. I think that is where the innovation takes place. This was mentioned this morning. You figure out what works and what doesn't in a fairly cost-effective manner. And I think most importantly, that's how stakeholders begin to build relationships and begin to build trust. And I think, as you both know, that's absolutely critical for border facilitation, trade, security between Canada and the United States.
So, Bill, let me throw you a bit of a curve. So in your presentation, you indicated the idea of a virtual security zone, and you relied on geopositioning as the basic technique. What about SEALs? What is the role for SEALs? That is moving away from the old mechanical SEAL to a highly sophisticated digital SEAL inside a container.
Well, SEALs are certainly part of that concept of a secure corridor. I think, and they would be GPS enabled, and they would let you know if it gets opened, where it's open, and things like that. But I think part of the concerns in terms of contraband are not necessarily in the cargo area. So if you're looking at the biggest, people at CVSA have told me, if you can find pills in an envelope, we want to talk to you, because the biggest nightmare they've got these days is the movement of opioids. And so a lot of this is stuff that's really the participation of the driver and stuff that's in the cab or in the sleeper or something like that, which is hard to deal with SEALs.
Right. So, Steve, building on Bill's response, why is it that in 2018, 21st century, we're having so much trouble in terms of scanning technology that we can't tell whether a weapon's in the back of a truck or a trunk, or whether an envelope coming into a postal service has pills or powder in it, or let alone the granddaddy of them all, which is CBRN. Why is it so difficult to distinguish between real radiation problems and kitty litter?
Right. Well, I think that a lot of that is the integration of a lot of new technologies that are coming in. I think in the past we've gotten a lot of technology, we put it out there, but we put it out there disparately. We put radiation portal monitors out, and we put X-ray systems out. We looked at, they've been RFPs that have been around for a long time, and technology that we've asked for that's been around for a long time. I think just, as I discussed, I think that a lot of what CBP is pushing for now and integrating a lot of those technologies is going to be an answer for a lot of that. Integrating, don't just put an X-ray system out there by itself. Put an X-ray system out there that's integrated into an approach with radiation detection, with biometrics, with other things, so that when a truck pulls up, you already know what's in the truck, who's driving the truck, what it is, and all you're doing is matching the manifest to an X-ray image that you know what to expect. So there is a lot of that is going on now and that can be done, I think, going forward.
Thank you. Lynn, do we have time for a couple of questions from the audience? Yes, be happy to field them. Yes, sir. Wait for them.
Oh, thank
there
you.
You go.
Brian Kuntz from the State Department. I have a quick question for Executive Director Manaher. So with regards to the facial recognition databases that you were referring to, it seems to me that in the example you cited where somebody takes their image when they're registering to fly, that essentially you're faced with the same old garbage in, garbage out problem. So that person enters their information, say in a country of concern, for example, and boards. If we don't have good database linkage with that host government, or if there's not good information sharing with the United States in terms of security databases, doesn't that throw a wrench into the works of the face rec issue? And then how is that resolved? I mean, presumably you would have to have database already entered with that person's information to make it verifiable. So otherwise, are you intent on them being diverted into secondary for those things? I'm just curious.
Sure. So maybe to level some, I'm not understanding your question. So as you know, we have from a U.S. citizen or license plate reader or BCC or license plate or legal permit resident or BCC, we've already ingested those databases from Department of State, as you know. We also have your non-immigrant visa photos, which we already have, which are from you, right, which we would, of course, match it as part of that photo process. For those passports with chips, we could easily open those right on primary line and go to a one-to-one if we can't get the match. But right now, and we're seeing a variety of flights, I guess I'm not understanding if we don't have a photo on someone, we would just revert to the current manual processing that's today. Would take the 10 prints and the whole 9 yards.
Another question? Yes, Ben.
Hi, Ben Proctor with the Canada Institute. I have one of those questions. It's a question for a friend, I promise you, and it relates to kind of that facial recognition technology. So if you're thinking about getting cosmetic surgery or something like that, okay, no, that's not my question. But I did bring up surgery because I wanted to say on behalf of Laura Dawson, who's director of the Canada Institute, she's not getting cosmetic surgery, but she's with her mom who just had hip surgery, and she's convalescing with her. But I did want to say that she wants to thank the entire audience for coming and really appreciates everyone's attendance here. My question is more on Canada-U.S. relations. So we know right now they're strained. They're maybe frayed even a little bit. You guys, some of you work with government, some of you are in government. Recently with the change in administration, have you noticed any either push or pull for better cooperation? You know, certainly these issues are much smaller than some of the NAFTA issues in terms of some of the temperature around there. But I just wonder if you could comment quickly, and I'll use Burson's rules of 30 seconds just to discuss kind of whether the interaction between the Canadian and U.S. government has changed.
Thanks, Ben. Why don't we start with Steve and come right down, and we'll give Colleen a chance to opt out if she cares to.
I do. I won't.
I think that we have seen some real progress in that area, and I haven't seen that slowing down. This has been over probably the last 12 months. I know CATSA and TSA, I certainly have seen them working closer together. I had them both out to my facility at the same time last year, which was a first, but it was very productive discussions. And I think CBP and CBSA are certainly looking at that on some of the current bridge projects and all we're doing. So I think that it's probably as good as I've seen it in recent time.
Yeah, that's consistent with what I hear. If I could twist your question a little bit because of what you brought up. One thing I think is very interesting is, you know, we have these NAFTA discussions. And now you have a situation where you can stop people in the street and ask them about rules of origin. They might know what rules of origin are. And some of the propositions or some of the ideas have been put up by the U.S. Would lead to more complex rules of origin, more specific types, in particular trying to go back further. We have what's called roll-up now. Once something is a Mexican, it's Mexican, and we count it as 100% NAFTA. The United States government asking, well, no, wait a minute, we want it, if that's 40% Chinese, we want that in there. That is where what we're talking about today, I think, would be very important. I think technology, when we talk about rules of origin, you're starting to see technology. I've always said that there's a border world and there's a trade world, a preferential trade agreement world. And I think that they're starting to come together. And I think it's going to be the same thing with Brexit, that you're going to start, don't try to make an agreement, then after the fact use the technology.
Thank you. Catherine?
So some of you have heard my spiel before. I absolutely think that because so much of the Canada-U.S. relationship actually takes place outside of Washington and Ottawa, that the noise that we are currently hearing with regard to trade or anything else from both Washington and Ottawa will obviously at the end of the day have an impact on those of us out there in the hinterlands. But Canada-U.S. stakeholders are pretty adept, pretty innovative, and regardless, quite frankly, of what happens here or in Ottawa with regard to NAFTA or whatever, we'll figure out a way to make it work because we have to.
Thank you, Catherine. Craig?
I echo all those sentiments.
Good. So Colleen will opt out. So being out of government, I have an opportunity to actually comment on this. Watch the facts on the ground. Many of the people in this room have built a relationship between Canada and the United States, and I would argue also between the United States and Mexico, and increasingly between Canada and Mexico, that cannot be denied. The kinds of $1.9 billion a day constitute facts that will not be denied. The security relationships that have been built up between CBP, CBSA, and the whole variety of Canadian and U.S. agencies are not going away. Watch what people do, not what they say. President Trump actually could come out of this if he delivers to us a modernized North American free trade agreement. North America 2.0 might end up actually being on the bright side of history as contrasted with what many people think now. And lastly, I would say that watch the extent of the integration that has taken place between Canadians and Americans over the last 15 or 18 years. Compared to what we faced on 9/11, this is not going to be a problem. For the first time, as a result of President Trump, the stakeholders have actually come out. We finally have a lobby for U.S.-Canadian relations that has never existed before. Certainly that was true on the southern border. So steady as we go. I have confidence in North America, and this panel, I think, should add to that. Lynn, I think we're ready to turn it over to you.
Thank you. An exceptional panel. Thanks all of you for your brilliant presentations. Thanks for wonderful moderation and moderation, indeed, in the commentary. So I've got a couple of quick logistics announcements. We're going to be moving to the dining room for the lunch. We're going through the doors that are near the coffee stand for those of you who took some coffee or something to eat this morning. It's a buffet, so please help yourselves when you go in the door, and then please head back and take a seat. Except for the luncheon speakers' reserved seats, there isn't going to be a head table. You can tell where their seats are reserved because it's right in front of the two directors' chairs with microphones on them. Jim Dickmeyer, who is my predecessor at the Canada Institute, now a global fellow with the Wilson Center, is going to be lunchtime master of ceremonies, and he's going to introduce our speaker, Mr. Vincent Rigby, and so we look forward to that. And we'll see you back here after the luncheon. Thank you all.
Thanks, Lynn.